Well, Sean, thank you so much for taking out some time to talk to me. Can you say a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Sean Sessel. I am the executive director of a company called the Oculus Institute, which I founded, which is based in comprehensive personal development, but mainly I help people get clear on their career purpose so that they can both make money and be happy. And it was actually one of my clients who introduced me to the idea of coming on this podcast with you.
Oh, I think that's awesome. And it's funny, you talk about that. I saw some people at Blue Origin this morning kind of talking about how early on in their career people were trying to talk them out of aerospace, but it was like their passion, and they stuck with it. So it's kind of interesting. So can you talk a little bit about your process? How do you like reawaken, or I'm sure a lot of people had passions about various things as they grew up, and they sort of grew out of them and put them to the side. And I mean, like, what's your process for kind of tapping back into that?
Wow. First of all, thank you for asking. It's funny you use the word reawaken because the name of my course is actually called Awaken. Um, first of all, is it actually starts internally. A lot of people don't realize this. Matter of fact, I was just having a discussion with someone yesterday, and she was like, "The best way to figure out what you love is trial and error." And I was like, "No, that is a very inefficient method." So there are a couple tools that I use. So one is there are a couple psychometrics that I like, particularly the DISC and the motivators. Most personality tests aren't very helpful for career stuff. Like I know people love Myers-Briggs and it's really helpful in personal dynamics, not helpful for career. But then I have to take people along this journey of internal exploration to kind of peel away all the societal conditioning that's layered on top. Because if you don't peel that away, they're going to end up doing what they think they should do instead of what they really want. And so that's like a multi-month thing where like you build this kind of spiritual vigilance of understanding yourself and seeing external conflict and internal conflict and stress and how the mind works. And you start seeing the difference between stuff that's conditioned and stuff that truly comes from the soul. And then from there, you can do a values discovery and actually get clear on your authentic values. And then I've just got a knack for like, if I have your DISC, your motivators, and your authentic values, I can come up with something pretty easily. Right? Like it's a gift, I guess. But sometimes people, once they have all that information, can do it for themselves. And so that's a very high level description of my process. I could literally talk for hours and hours on it, but that's a summary.
That's pretty amazing. I imagine a lot of it also, I mean, I've talked to some people in like Asian communities and what have you, and they're being filtered into like medical jobs and engineering
Oh,
jobs,
yes.
and not so much like some of them have passions for entrepreneurship or for art or for all these other things. But it's like this feedback loop, right? I mean,
Yep.
it's like, what's your kid doing? Well, he's studying to be pre-med. What's your kid doing? Well, he doesn't know. It's like, the tense pressure, to
Yeah.
try to figure
I,
that
I
out.
saw that a lot at university, right? A tremendous amount because I went to a university where there was a pretty sizable Asian population. And specifically, Chinese Americans, Korean Americans, Indian Americans, but also people of Middle Eastern extraction. And I would say that it is more common in those cultures, but it absolutely 100% isn't uncommon in, white Anglo-Saxon, whatever you want to call it, culture here in America. And those of us that tell ourselves that it is, I think maybe buying into some kind of like slight racial superiority thing, because it's absolutely like most people are woven with this idea that if you don't do what your authorities tell you to do, that you're going to get eaten by the big poverty monster. And that's not actually true at all, right? Like there's no security in the corporate world compared to the idea of having your own skills and knowing how to monetize them. But a lot of people think that, and just because they don't confine it to like the narrow space of medicine, engineering, law, doesn't mean that it's not there. And unfortunately, it is common across all cultures. It is a little bit stronger in Middle Eastern and Asian cultures, but it's absolutely, I mean, it's like saying, hey, listen, that guy's got one apple and that guy's got two apples. It doesn't mean any of them are going to feed a village. So I think every human being should really do some introspection, regardless of what culture they're from, and learn, hey, am I really living for myself, or am I living based on what people have told me I should do?
Yeah, that's a very good point. And as you were talking, maybe in the US, it's less. of a particular career as opposed to kind of like a career path. Like you need
Mhm.
to get the best grades you can in high school, you need to go to college, and then you need to get
Yep.
a corporate job. Like,
Yep,
you know,
exactly. That's the thing is you got to make sure you get into a good university and then do well there so you can get into a good job and then stay in that good job and be a good little corporate worker bee. Because if you don't have that good job, then the big scary poverty monster will get you and you're screwed. And in reality, like that's just not the truth, right? Like people burn out all the time. Like there's no security there. People get fired all the time. People, even if they don't quit because they're burned out or get fired, living like a zombie for decades is not a good life, you know? And on the other hand, I know tons and tons of people who have been able to be successful in creating their own income, and they actually have more security because they're not worrying, oh, am I going to lose my job? Oh, have I pissed off my boss? Whatever. Like you could take me or any of these other people that I'm talking about, drop us in the streets of Bangkok and Thailand with no money, no reputation, wipe our names from history, and we'd rebuild it. That's security, is knowing that you can rebuild it. That's power.
oh, exactly. I mean, it's not what you have in the bank, it's the skills that you have in your person.
Yeah,
It's,
exactly. Take Elon Musk, for example. If you wiped Elon Musk from history, you wave a magic wand, he has no money, no nothing, and you drop him on the streets of Rio de Janeiro, how long do you think before he's a billionaire again?
I don't know, maybe 5 years.
It wouldn't be long.
But I mean, that kind of goes to there's a set of skills you need and an outlook you need in order to be successful. And so many people, I mean, you don't really learn that from watching broadcast TV or Netflix or what have you. You don't learn that from your peers and your family group unless they happen to be successful and kind
Yep.
of doing that. So it's almost like enforced societal stratification
Yeah,
because of how
absolutely.
you learn that. Now, I guess Elon's kind of an exception in a way because I mean he did come from South Africa. He went to Canada. He kind of I mean
Well, so he's not an exception. So my father's from South Africa, by the way. And there is a very large population of South African Jews, to be specific, which broke off of Ashkenazi Jews who left Germany in the 30s. Like my grandmother, she in 1933, she was like, "This Hitler character, not a good person. I'm leaving now." And there were a bunch of specifically of Ashkenazi Jews who came to South Africa in that time, and that particular culture has of that South African Jewish group has had and taught in all their descendants and stuff a lot of principles that are really powerful for success. So I think Elon Musk is an exceptional individual in many ways, but also he did come from a background where he did have that available to him. One of the beauties of the world today, though, is that information is available to everybody. In the old days, all you had access to was your family and your neighbors. Today, you have access to all of humanity. It's amazing. And that's why I'm so passionate about personal development, because you can shift that course, right? And even people who are successful. I mean, like I have a client that I'm working with, her parents are financially quite successful and she's financially quite successful, but she wasn't happy because she was never taught what it's really like to be happy in your career. And I see it all the time, and you have today, everybody has access to reach out to people who can help them break those bonds and teach them a better way.
yeah, but you mentioned that there's like a set of principles that this group is teaching to their community, to their children, to each other. I mean, what are sort of the top few principles that
Well,
makes
so
that?
I think the first one is that, critical thinking is really important, right? A lot of people don't think critically. They don't question authority, right? This particular group does question authority, right? They do say, hey, listen, no matter who you are, no matter who you're talking to, at the end of the day, status isn't what determines who's right and who's wrong. Truth is what decides who's right and who's wrong, right? And even if the world doesn't reflect that externally, stand there, right? And at the end of the day, it does matter. I think one of the other ones is honesty in business dealings, right? My father taught me from a very young age the importance of integrity in business. He was in a business where it was very competitive and very fragmented, 20 to 30 people in his market, and his company was ended up being one of the three that survived after the dot-com bust. And he asked one of his clients about it once, and the customer said, listen, Hilton, the reason you're still around and the reason that I didn't give my business to anyone else is because I know that if you give me your word, you're going to hold to it and you're going to make good. And you've demonstrated that even when it costs you money. And so it ended up paying off in the long run. I think the third is ambition, never settling, never settling. And this is really relevant to, to the whole moonshot thing, right? That principle of not saying, hey, this is good enough, right? Of saying, hey, I'm going to be the best that I can be. I think that's really, really important. So if I had to break it down, I would say the importance of truth, the in terms of like, not deferring to authority, the importance of integrity and how you carry yourself, and ambition. That's probably the three most important qualities. And of course, discipline and hard work. I guess that's number 4.
Now, do you feel like in the American educational system, like the public school system, do you feel like those core values are being taught, not being taught, being ignored, are actually counter values are being taught? I mean, like, kind of, where do you think?
Well, I think for when it comes to standing in oneself and individualism, I think that the opposite is being taught. We are taught to follow authority. I think that's incredibly destructive. I think that's why 85% of people aren't happy in their jobs, is for exactly that reason, because that's what they're taught from a very young age. I think in terms of integrity with other people, yes, it's mentioned, but the fact is that it's one thing to say it, it's another to do it. And unfortunately, a lot of people are saying it, but not doing it. And so, kids tend to go more off of what you do than what you say. Right. And I say this as somebody who also has an educational consulting company. I'm a junior partner in an educational consulting company. And I can tell you that, we've interacted with school districts that are very, very corrupt. Let's put it that way. And, the kids will mirror what they see. And so I think even though integrity is taught intellectually, it's not taught by example. I think in terms of ambition, actually, it is either ignored or not taught at all, right? Sometimes people say, oh yeah, you could be anything you want, but like they obviously don't have the conviction, they don't mean it. And in private interactions, there's a lot more of, oh, be realistic, do this, do this, do this, right? And a lot of limiting beliefs are put in. And I think that's less, that one is particularly less in the educational system and more in personal interactions, family interactions, friend interactions. And then I think in terms of discipline, again, that's something that everybody says, but nobody really does. Everybody always seems to be looking for the easy way, and that just doesn't work out so well. And I think, that's probably a big component of like, I get so many people who come to me, they're like, wait a minute, you can do what you love and make money. So basically you're going to tell me how to make $1 million a year working 10 hours a week, right? And I'm like, no, that's not it. I'm expecting you to work your ass off, but right, you could be working your ass off doing something you love instead of something that you don't want to do. So.
Yeah, no, that's a very important thing. And, then you wonder why people's careers like flounder and, they're so territorial. I mean, a lot of these organizations, you see people doing things that really should have been automated or eliminated a long time ago.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
it's like their only reason for being. And so they like, they're very antisocial around those things.
Yeah, because they gave up on something else. And so they're protecting what they think they have, but it's just an illusion, right? It's an illusion of control, and it's a cheap facsimile of what they could have been and what they still could be if they, followed their heart and did something that really called to them. And yeah, it's going to be hard, but fear is the great obstacle. And that's part of the human journey to overcome.
But in terms of like scaling that up to like a nation level, I mean, a lot of the kind of interactions we were just talking about on an individual level seem to be the way that like the nation as a whole might
Yeah, you
be.
can't do it top down. I've never seen any kind of top down kind of thing that's ever worked. You can set up incentive structures from the top that contribute to that flourishing because, they reward the people who do certain things and, they don't incentivize bad behavior. Like there are some things you can do to help it, but ultimately it always starts from the grassroots. And ultimately the policies that are going to get put in place at a societal level are ultimately determined by the grassroots, at least in a democracy, right? And so it starts from the bottom and it starts with individuals. And, it's funny though, somebody once told me, Sean, you know what the secret is to all the people who want to change the world but never do? Is they're going about it in the wrong order. Because if you want to change the world, you have to start by leading yourself. Once you lead yourself, then you go lead one other person, one other real human interaction. Then you learn to lead a group of people, right? A group of people in a room. And only after that, once you've gotten good at leading a group, then you can move to leading a movement. But if you try to jump to leading a movement and changing society before you lead yourself or before you can teach one other person, you're out of order and you're going to get screwed.
Yeah, everybody envisions themselves being a rock star, but nobody envisions being, the years of thankless practice and complete, being
Yeah.
ignored. So,
I actually have a friend who is a kind of a famous pop star in Asia. He was in a boy band of all things, but like before they broke was 10 years of hard work, and then suddenly they went big, and people were like, oh my god, overnight success, but it wasn't really.
uh,
So
yeah, and that's true. So many things. I see that famous legal writer person that wrote, A Time to Kill and The Firm. Gosh, what's his
John
name?
Grisham.
Yeah, John Grisham. I was reading about him, how he was like a lawyer and he really wanted to become like this novelist. And, he would get up like 3 hours before he normally did to go to the office and work. And when he published A Time to Kill, nobody even, uh, nobody even noticed it. But then later on, The Firm got published and kind of worked out. So.
Yep, absolutely.
So I guess how many people have you worked with that wanted to go and be in the space industry, but they were kind of talked out of it, and now they're doing something like they're in oil and gas or whatever.
So I honestly, only a handful of people have ever mentioned the space industry to me in particular, right? A lot of people never even become aware of that calling in the beginning, right? It happens at such an early age that they don't even ever uncover it. Um, I have worked with people who have mentioned, hey, listen, they wanted to be astronauts. I have heard that probably, I don't know, a couple dozen times. I've talked to well over 1,000 people on the subject. So astronaut comes up in like the, hey, what did you want to be when you were younger thing? But they never really talk about it with conviction on the phone. So I'm not sure. I do know I had a roommate from university who actually works at SpaceX, believe it or not. He always wanted to work at SpaceX, and he was in engineering, doing chemical engineering for Schlumberger, and now he's at SpaceX. And he actually he's been sitting at his computer, and Elon comes up and tells him, "Hey, Bill, I have a question for you." And he's like, "Ah!"
Does that happen regularly, or that just happen like a couple of
he,
times?
he says it's happened a couple of times. He says Elon doesn't make noise when he enters the room, and he doesn't say anything. He just leans over your shoulder and says, "Hey, I have a question for you." And you're like, "Ah!" And then he'll ask you like something super technical and want an exact number on something and expect you to have it. Like he's very intense.
Wow, that's that's kind of amazing. I think that kind of drives excellence throughout the organization. Yeah, Elon could
Mhm.
be over your shoulder or what have you.
Yeah, right. You better have your numbers at all times.
Exactly. You don't know what the question is going to be, but you better be right.
Yeah. So cool.
Um, so about us going back to the moon in 2024, I guess when did you first become aware of that?
Well, I read The Economist pretty regularly. So, people have been talking about going to the moon, going to Mars, all this kind of stuff for a while, right? As far as firm plans, I think and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that these were only firmed up in the past like year or so. Am I wrong about that?
Yeah, it was basically the National Space Council meeting, I think February of 2019,
Yeah, that's what I
where
thought.
they kind of came out and said, "Hey, I know y'all are targeting 2028, but that's too far away. We could do better than that. Let's do 2024."
Yeah, yeah. I think that's what I said. I think it was sometime within the past year or two that I read it. So I think it's exciting. At the end of the day, humans are meant to explore. We're meant to, you know, push the boundaries. And the fact that we haven't for the past, 50 years or whatever, I think has had a negative effect on our culture. Right. And I think that, we should go back to space. I think we should push to the moon, to Mars and beyond because it's needed. Like there's certain people, who need that kind of like, hey, listen, I'm going to test my luck in the Wild West kind of thing. And space can be that frontier. And obviously we're a long way from that, but I do think that there's a lot of potential there.
Yeah, and I talked to one person, and he was talking about these worldwide happiness surveys,
Mm-hmm.
and he was saying that the people in South America are much happier than the people in North America. And one of the reasons that he was given for this is that the people in South America, they kind of always think of, they could go to America or Canada if things get bad enough.
Mm-hmm.
So they always
Yep.
have like an out. But even if like the vast majority of people don't go to space, they stay here on Earth, just knowing that that option exists maybe gives them some type of soulless. And I was wondering if you thought that was a reasonable theory.
100% agree with that. 100% agree with that, because it's, as I said, it's like the Wild West. Like if things got really bad, you had the option to go to the Wild West. And even if you didn't, right, you didn't feel trapped. You didn't feel powerless. And that feeling of powerlessness is hugely destructive. And then people will numb it away. And I think that's one reason why, you have doom scrolling and Netflix binging and addiction and all that kind of stuff has increased, I think, is because people feel trapped. They feel like there's no way out. And at the end of the day, I honestly don't think things are that bad, but a lot of people do seem to think that way. So
I know it's all relative, isn't it? I mean,
yeah,
if you're coming from a place where you don't have running water, electricity is not something you have, your chances of dying from like a bomb or something it's, you know, in the double digits. Your idea of what good and bad is very different than,
yeah.
somebody growing up in middle class America who's just, you
I
know,
mean, I mentioned my dad was from South Africa. So like when I was young, he took me back to like the slums of South Africa. I mean, like the worst places in South Africa. And like I've seen how bad it can be. And from a young age, he beat that into me like, hey, listen, like have a sense of perspective. And we were talking about that earlier, the other qualities that particular community instilled. One is a sense of perspective. I guarantee you Elon's seen that same thing I did, right? And that sense of like knowing what's there and being grateful for what you have. I mean, like when Americans come to me and they're like, oh, this is so bad and this and that. And like Trump said that, or Obama said that, or this other thing, or like my boyfriend said that, or this or that. And I'm like, dude, like I wake up and almost every day I'm like, I have food to eat. I have running water. I have a bed to sleep on. I have clothes to wear. Life is good. And I am thankful.
I know it's, I mean, and just think like 100 years ago, the idea of being able to adjust the temperature in your house by simply,
Right?
turning a knob or flipping a lever is just unbelievable. So,
I don't know if you've ever seen that skit by Louis C.K., but he's talking about like people on airplanes. He's like, I was on an airplane the other day and they announced that they had free in-flight Wi-Fi as a trial thing. And then like 15 minutes into, they're like, hey guys, listen, this experimental, it's not working right now. And the guy next to me goes, God damn it. And he's like, and I'm sitting there thinking like, man, you didn't even know this existed 15 minutes ago. And now you're angry that you can't have it. And he's like, think about like back in 200 years ago, if you wanted to go from New York to Seattle, that would take your whole life. You'd have to like go on the whole Oregon Trail and like try not to die.
I know. I actually heard that exact same thing. I think that was like what, 10 years ago, maybe 15 years
It
ago,
was,
I
it was,
think.
it was, I think, yeah, I think it was like 10 years ago, but it's always stuck with me because he's like you're in a chair in the sky and you're ungrateful. Like that sense of perspective. Like if you think about it, not only are most Americans, the vast majority of Americans in the top 10% of the world in terms of income. If you look at not just the world as it is today, but all of humanity that's ever existed, like how lucky are we to be living in this time? The idea of going to the moon, for example, right? Like imagine you told somebody back in the year 1000, hey, we're going to go to the moon. Like they would have hung you for witchcraft.
But, you talked about being like spiritually centered,
Mm-hmm,
and this was really difficult to do historically, like even before like this constant barrage of information towards us that was meant to manipulate us either into voting a certain way, uh, giving money in a certain way, buying certain
mm-hmm,
things, what have you. I mean, there
mm-hmm,
is real science and engineering and lots of investment around manipulating people.
mm-hmm.
And
There has been for a long time though. So as somebody like when I teach people, when I help people like get to their purpose, that internal exploration process uses a set of tools that I learned from an esoteric school. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the term esoteric school, but I can trace my philosophical lineage back like literally 4 or 5 thousand years, right? And there have been these schools throughout history that have worked on this kind of boundary between the mind and the soul, because like you are not your mind, you are not the thoughts running through your head, you are the observer and the programmer of those thoughts, right? And there have been schools, and one of the terms that was used was white magic and black magic. And white magic were the schools that were help people understand that and awaken themselves and come to that point of freedom. And black magic was the schools that use those tools to manipulate people, right? And in the modern age, both those tools, both sets of tools have been are a lot more available, right? Because information is more available. And one of the biggest, most well-known uses of those tools, even though people don't realize it, was Himmler was actually, so Himmler was the architect behind Nazi propaganda and arguably the puppet master behind Hitler. And he studied in an esoteric school, and he went deep into the black magic component of it. He studied a lot of Aleister Crowley, and then he used those tools to essentially brainwash an entire nation. And then, you know, you got the Nazis. Whereas America, funny enough, was founded by mostly Freemasons, who was actually an esoteric school of white magic. So World War II is very much kind of this quintessential good versus evil thing, which is really fascinating if you understand that background perspective. But if you look at that today, on one hand, we have people who have refined the black magic tools into a tremendous science. But on the other hand, you have the ability to free yourself and grow far more available than it ever has been. So at the end of the day, people have the choice, and the divergence between choosing, it's a lot easier to get out, but the costs of not doing that work are a lot higher in terms of how brainwashed and sheeple you're going to be.
Yeah, I'd be really interested in understanding kind of like the techniques that you kind of empower people with to sort of control that flow of manipulation and to really stay connected to sort of their purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, I could talk about that for a long time. If people are interested, they can go check out my YouTube channel at theoculusinstitute.com. You know, like I've got a lot of material out there, a lot of free content out there. If people want to hit me up for, you know, there's a group called the Science of Career Freedom on Facebook. Like, join it. Like, if you want to direct message me, that's fine. But at a high level, I would say the principle starts with disidentification, realizing that you are not your mind, stepping back and observing without judgment or condemnation. And I start people with observing just mechanical reactions. Then I move them to observing stress and the effects that it has on them in both their behavior, their energy, their physical symptoms. Then I move them into, we go through a phase of studying external conflict, which is complaining, which is entitlement, like you're perceived, I have a right to this, blame, revenge. Then we move into internal conflict, which is people pleasing, deferring to authority, self-judgment, and false fronts. Then we move into stress, which is anger, guilt, fear, and grief, along with methods to dissolve all of those. And then we move into like tricks of the mind, which are things like expectations, associations, replaying records, and greed, which I define as the constant search for more, better, and different. And then from that place, if you get really good at observing those 16 things there, then you get to, you know, you're going to build that kind of spiritual strength there. And then you can start looking into aspects of the awareness or the soul, which are things like your beliefs and your values and that kind of stuff. And then there's a whole more spiritual journey after that. But that's the basic. If everybody just does those basics, then like the world would be a totally different place.
Now, you have the YouTube channel, and I
Yes.
think you also hinted at, you know, one-on-one sessions. Do you also have like classes and things like that? I mean, like, what's the range of opportunities to interact with you and this?
Yeah. So the way that I do it is obviously there's free stuff in the YouTube channel. There's free stuff on the Facebook page and in the Facebook group. If people are interested in working with me directly, then they can reach out and do that. I have written a book that's public called Soulfire. I will say I am in the middle. Not in the middle. I am nearing the end of the editing, or at least of this round of editing for a new book that's going to launch early next year. And honestly, it's so much better than Soulfire that what I'm doing is, if people want to read that book and they email me, I'm just sending them the manuscript for free.
Oh,
Right.
wow.
So like, rather than paying for Soulfire and paying $7 for the ebook or whatever, you can get a much better version for free. Obviously, once it's not finished of editing yet, so you're getting something rough. But it's all written. It's been through 3 rounds of editing. I'm almost done with the 4th round, and then I'm going to send it off to my professional editor. And then I'm going to have to make a whole bunch of changes there, but it probably will be coming out in early next year. I am working on a self-study course, because working with me one-on-one is, you know, it's not a small investment. So I'm working on putting together a self-study course that should be going live sometime in the next couple of months. So people can at least like get a feel for it, start getting some early wins. And then if people want to work with me one-on-one, you know, I do have anybody can buy my time for my hourly rate, but again, that's kind of high. You probably would get more bang. If your goal is to discover your career purpose, or your goal is to free yourself and awaken that internal part, you're better off going through the whole process and just doing it in one package lump sum, which is the Awaken program that I talked about earlier.
Okay, that's awesome. And I know we're right at the top of the hour. Did you have some more time, or do you need to go?
I have a little bit more time. I did have some people who I was gonna call after this. How much more time were you thinking?
Maybe 10 minutes.
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay. So we're returning back to the moon. You're excited about it. I'm excited about it. We see it as a good thing. Not everybody sees it as a good thing. Some people are like, why are we going to the moon whenever we have, poverty here on Earth, global climate change, all these other issues. And what's your sort of response to that?
Short-sighted, because if you look at the original moonshot Apollo program and all that kind of stuff, the technological advancements that were made laid the foundation for all the economic growth that occurred, in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, right? The internet in part was built out of that. All modern computing was built out of all that kind of stuff. So what people don't realize is that those grand scientific ventures in and of themselves, they have intrinsic value for people who, value more than immediate material comforts. But additionally, they lay the groundwork for prosperity, right? Though the pursuit of science has so many externalities that bleed over. It's tremendous, and I'm in favor of grand scientific projects, whether that be colonizing Mars or curing cancer. Like I'll be honest with you, I'm not in favor of the government funding like little grants, right? Like I'm a published scientist, right? I published 2 papers nationally before I was old enough to buy a beer, and the way that the grant process is done is screwed up. But when you talk about like big giant stuff that the private industry and private donors and private universities are never going to be able to do, and you have, and the amount of government investment that's required to do that is actually like really small compared to like the alternatives. And then the bleed over effects of the technology developed is just so powerful, right? And so I mean, if you look at the ROI from the first moonshot, it's just out of this world. So I think that, getting back to the moon isn't going to provide the same benefits because we've already done it, but it's a prerequisite to the next step in the journey that's ultimately going to create so much more prosperity and so much more innovation in the long run.
Well, and there's also the other argument too about not going to the moon. I've heard this from just a handful of people, but it's come up enough that I don't know, maybe it only came up one time and I amplified it, but it's, oh, why are we going to the moon? We don't want to mess up the moon. We've already messed up Earth. This kind of like negative humanitarian, humanist view, the anti-humanist view.
Well, that's an interesting idea. I think that, like, yes, we have messed up Earth to some extent, but the solution to fixing Earth isn't we can't undo the past. The solution is more technology, not less, right? It's a matter of being more efficient instead of just consuming more resources. And if you look at it like we're not like, if we go to the moon, even if we colonize the moon, like what are we going to mess up there? Are we going to fill the oceans with plastic? No, we're not, because there are no oceans on the moon, right? Are we going to kill off the species on the moon? No, we're not, because there are no species on the moon. Are we going to fuck up the moon's atmosphere? No, we're not, because the moon doesn't have an atmosphere. So like, I would ask people, what's your exact fear of what we're going to do to the moon? Because I don't really understand like what we can possibly do to hurt the moon.
Yeah, I know that was sort of my reaction too was pollution doesn't make sense without life. Like pollution is inorganic stuff hurting organic stuff. And if you don't have the organic stuff, then is there such
I
a
mean,
thing as
it's
pollution?
possible. It's possible that we could like leave a bunch of debris on the moon. Like we could just leave a bunch of trash there if we're really that stupid. But I think that it's a much easy, because it's not a complex ecosystem kind of thing, and there aren't these complex systems. It's probably going to be a lot easier. And 5-year-olds can understand the concept of pick up your trash. So
Hmm. If it was safe and affordable, would you take a trip into space?
I would take a trip into space if it wasn't safe and affordable.
How far would you go? Are you talking about just like suborbital, a week in orbit to the moon and back, or maybe a multi-year journey to Mars and back? Like, what would be your ambition?
I mean, I've got some things that I believe I'm meant to do on this planet. I also believe that we're going to stop and then eventually reverse aging with biotechnology at some point in my lifetime. And so the way I think about it is I'm going to finish my mission here on Earth. And that may take me, 150, 200 years. I think that I may have that time. And like, if that's the case and I don't have a clock on my life, when I've done everything I want to do here, I wouldn't just go to Mars. I'd go as far as we can go. I want to see the edge. I want to do the whole Star Trek, go where no man has gone before.
That's awesome. And well, Sean, I really appreciate your time. You're a very positive person. I think you're a force for good and positive change, and I just feel really fortunate to get this time to speak to you.
Thanks, man. I've had a lot of fun. I'm glad that Jason recommended I come on. Thank you for having me. And I think that we share a lot in common about the next frontier of humanity, and it's been a wonderful discussion.
Well, you have a good rest of your day, and I look forward to being in touch.
Sounds good. Cheers, Nathan. Bye.
Bye.